Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Stonebelt's webinar. This is our first webinar of the 2023 calendar year. But don't worry, there'll be 4 more webinars to come this year. Today, we welcome Reverend Dr. Letiah Fraser. She's going to talk to us about worldviews within the disability community and disability culture, and then also talk to us about how that then has an effect on our spirituality, especially for those with intellectual developmental disabilities. Let's see. Let me move some things so I can click to the next screen. For those of you who don't know, Stonebelt is located in Bloomington, Bedford, and Columbus, Indiana, and we serve and provide services for people in and around those areas. I am your host, Sarah McKenney. I am the spiritual support coordinator for Stonebelt ARC. Stonebelt ARC is a nonprofit service provider. We are a community-based service provider, and we offer a wide range of support services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Part of what we do here is also provide spiritual supports. We are a secular organization, meaning we provide spiritual support to people of any and all faith or spiritual practices, and then also help people explore what that is for them as well. I will put the link to make a donation in the chat box here in a moment, but please consider making a donation, as we do try to provide these webinars for you all free, but we do want to thank our guest speakers for their time. So please consider making a donation. So like I said, this is the first of a series of webinars this year. All of our past webinars, we've done it, this is the 3rd year that we are doing these webinars. So you can look at all of our historical webinars on our website, which you will find there on the bottom of your screen. And I will also put that in the chat box here in a few minutes as well. But this year we will be welcoming in May Dr. Ben Connor and soon to be Dr. Daniel Aaron Harris. And they will be talking about bridging the purpose gap, disability and vocation. And so that is in May. In July, we have Reverend Lisa McKee. She will be talking about people with disabilities in leadership. So leadership roles in the congregation, that sort of thing, and the importance of that. In September, y'all are going to hear from me, actually. I will be talking a little bit about my thesis that I'm working on geared toward transportation, as it's one of the primary barriers, especially for people with intellectual developmental disabilities, in attending faith communities. So we'll be taking a look at that. And then I've decided we're going to make it a tradition. So we're going to end the year in November with another webinar on stories of belonging, where you will hear from people with intellectual developmental disabilities and their success stories, the stories of how they found belonging in their faith communities. Some Zoom instructions in case you aren't familiar or don't know, or the rules always change each time you come on. Your microphone is muted currently. Feel free to use that chat box to say who you are, where you're from, why you're here. Use it as a networking tool. Introduce yourselves to each other. Chat amongst yourselves. And then you can also use the Q&A box for your questions. Feel free to ask those along the way. Letiah will have times during the presentation to maybe look at some of those, and then definitely at the end. And then finally, closed captioning. So closed captioning is turned on my end, which then allows you to either turn that on or off. So you can check for that setting. If you move your mouse, you should be able to pull that up if that is needed as well. So without further ado, let's go to the person you all came here to listen to, Reverend Dr. Letiah Fraser. She was born and raised in New York City, but now lives in Kansas City. She identifies as a proud African-American woman who lives with cerebral palsy. She has many achievements. She has her master's degree as well as her Doctor of Divinity. She is currently the pastor of the Open KC and organizer of the KC Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and as well as a chaplain. So please also, you'll note on the screen, she is a contributing writer to the devotional We Cry Justice, and has also written other aspects in the Poor People's Campaign, the Bible, reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign. So Letiah, welcome. So good to have you here.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks for all of you who are taking this hour to spend time together. I just want to do a couple of notes, one on language, but also to recognize that I identify as someone within the disability community, as someone that lives with cerebral palsy, and I'm a woman, and I am African American. So there are many ways in which all the things that make up who I am intersect. And I will say that I'm only one voice within the disability community, knowing that there are many voices within them, and that we don't all agree. So with that note, thinking about language, I say that there are at least 3 main languages used within the disability community. One is sign language, and the other is identity first, and then people first. You can move to the next slide. So it's sign language. So there are many different sign languages, but within the US, primarily we use American Sign Language. Sign language is a language, and it's not a translation into English. Many people who are deaf use sign language interpreters, not translators. Most people who are deaf don't consider themselves disabled, but the issue is that folks that are hearing, many don't understand sign language. And if we understood sign language, then the thing that is disabling folks who are deaf is more a language barrier, okay? Hearing, so again, ignorant of the language. And then also just the note that we are to be aware of misappropriating sign language. This often happens in faith spaces where maybe someone thinks it's cool to do a song using sign language. And I think that that's great and helpful if there are actually folks who are deaf in the community, right? And not just an artistic expression, because it's a language like any other. Okay, you can switch to the next slide. Then there's identity first. So most folks within the deaf community, or those who consider themselves autistic, would prefer identity first, although this is becoming more of the common usage within the disability community as a whole. So it's like my disability is intricately a part of who I am, and that whatever your disability is, whether deafness, autism, cerebral palsy, there's nothing wrong with that. And so we can use those words. So that's identity first. Keep going. So disability is so equated with identity. Keep going. And then we have person first language, which many folks who were a part of the start of the disability rights movement really honed in on this, because they wanted society to recognize folks with disabilities as people, that our personhood would be emphasized, that our disability is just a part of who we are, just as our gender, just as our hobbies, but it's not all of who we are. Okay, you can keep going. I think I'll use probably a mix of both. I often say that when I'm in a space where I know that there are just folks with disabilities, I use identity first language. And when I'm not sure, I defer to people first, but it kind of goes in and out. So, but I also want to say that like person plus disability equals people first language. So again, we're putting person as the emphasis than whatever their disability is. Okay. Since most of us, from what I understand, are coming from some faith background, I thought it would be good for us to start with a prayer. One that I wrote that's included in one of our Lenten resources for the Poor People's Campaign. So this one is called Using Our Bodies to Protest, Lament, and Pray, which feels right for those of us who are in this Lenten reflection season. So let us pray. Our disabled existence tells an embodied story of resistance. Parts are filled with beauty, others are pretty gory. We are blind, we are crippled, we are deaf, we are neurodivergent, artistic, nonverbal. We've had surgeries and psychological evaluations and many other pokes and prods. Our existence is resistance. May we be proud of who we are. We could skip to the next one. We are comrades in the struggle for human rights, affordable housing, healthcare, and living wages. We are the often forgotten ones of the present and our history's pages. Using our wheelchairs, walkers, and crutches, we continue to fight. Perhaps this Lenten season is less about deprivation and more about shining a light on the poor and dispossessed. Lent is not just about remembering we will die. We are well acquainted with death, 725 a day. Those who, with the political power, lack the will to try to recognize and honor our shared humanity. During this Lenten season, we lift our disabled voices against this legalized profanity. Enough is enough. May Lent be a time to use our disabled bodies to protest, lament, and pray. Amen. So disability is greater than our diagnosis, whatever they are, because it includes culture. And every culture has some of the same elements. So you can go to the next slide. So some of the elements within the disability culture is that we have our own history, we have our own languages, we have our own worldview, which is what worldviews, what we will be focusing on most today, and then disability theology and how all of these things kind of play out in our everyday lives. Okay, going. Disability worldviews or models of disability. I'm going to focus on three main ones. So the first one is the medical model. This is the one that says this is the person, the thing that is wrong with the person is centered on the person, right? So the person has this disability, that is the problem that needs to be fixed or rehabilitated or somehow mediated, right? To get that the disabled person as close to society standard as normal in quotes as possible. Okay. There are pros and cons to this medical model. I think sometimes as an overcorrection of something, we create another model, which we'll talk about, but there are some pros. The pros to the medical model is that there's a label for what is happening in my body or mind. I get to understand a little bit more about what I'm experiencing. Like I get to name those things and have it be recognized. And this is helpful for the doctors as well, because there are medical advances that are helpful for the way that I live and understand and operate in the world. And to have those things are good things. To have my crutches are good things and helpful in the way that I am to get around. So to label what I'm already experiencing in my body is a good thing. Cons, I think that sometimes the humanity of the person is overlooked. So this is helpful in a medical setting sometimes. Let's say if we're having a heart surgery, we want that person to be skilled in fixing the thing that is wrong with my heart. And yet it is still important to recognize that we're speaking to a person. We are trying to assist the person and not just a diagnosis. Another con is that I think sometimes under the medical model, the spiritual and social needs are ignored, right? We're just focused on fixing this thing or mediating this thing and not really asking questions that other people, maybe social workers or other care providers would ask. But I think this is a con of the medical model when you're focused on fixing. And then another con is our worth is measured by our productivity, which is part of being in our consumeristic society, right? Value is based on what you can produce, how many hours you can work. It's very medical model focused. Okay, we can go to the next one. Some spiritual or existential questions I think that the medical model leaves us asking is, am I worthy in and of myself, regardless of how my body is made and how it functions? Why did God make me this way? Like, why, right? Is it something that I did wrong, my parents did wrong? While that doesn't need to be what we actually believe and think, which I will talk about later. Those are the questions that come up. And then what is my value as a person with a disability? So I think those are some existential or spiritual questions that are asked. And then we have the social model of disability, which says it is not the diagnosis that I have, but the systems and structures that make me disabled. So if there were elevators everywhere, the fact that I use crutches wouldn't be a problem because I wouldn't be disabled and I could get around. Or the systems, right? So the fact that our society has decided people with disabilities will have a harder time to gain employment, that is the thing that is disabling, not the fact that I live with an intellectual or developmental disability, right? So these are both good, and again, there's pros and cons, in which we'll talk about next. So the pros of the social model is that the humanity of the person is recognized. And it acknowledges that the systems and structures in our society is the thing that disables us. And yet there are still cons. And I think that within the disability rights movement, it was a correction of the medical model. It's to say, we are more than our diagnosis, and we're human and its structures. But I think partly the cons of the model is it ignores the realities of disability. It is my reality that my body cannot do certain things. It doesn't decrease my humanity, but I will never be able to run a marathon or run up many stairs because my body is limited that way. It fosters maybe some internalized ableism. So it's the society that disables us by its structures. But if I can somehow accommodate or assimilate into it and become more passable or less disabled than somebody else within the disability community, then I'm going to do that. So there is this sort of hierarchy of disability, which often folks that have not had disabilities their whole life but acquire them are on the top, and folks with intellectual or developmental disabilities find themselves on the bottom. And I think that one of the problems with the social model is that it reinforces this hierarchy that shouldn't be there as a community. Okay, some spiritual questions. Why is there injustice in the world? Right, I think all of us with or without disabilities are asking that. But if I am denied things simply because I am a person with a disability, I'm going to ask this question: why is there injustice? Why do I have to fight to justify my humanity, to say I am worth it, I should get that job, I have a voice, I have opinions? Is God, I should say God, not good, but good is good too. Is God really good? Because if I'm made this way and I'm experiencing these injustices, is God a really good God? Because why didn't God make me without a disability? And then, am I good enough? So again, that internalized ableism comes again. Am I good enough? Can I produce this much? And because I can't, does that make me less or more? Okay. And then we have this limits model, which I first heard of from Deborah Beth Kramer. And she takes what I call what is good from both models, both the medical and the social model. So the medical model says we have a disability, and we can acknowledge it and name it, and it's okay. And the social model says, just because we have a disability doesn't mean we're not human. It's the structures that disable us. But the limits model says our bodies actually have limits, and the society has limited us. And that some days, my body can be more limited than others, depending on what's available to me, what I have access to, and how accessible my environment is. Okay, we can keep going. So pros of the limits model: it takes the best of both models, and it understands that disability can be fluid, which means that some days I may not have as much pain and I'm able to do more than I was able to do yesterday. And some days my disability and how it impacts my body is really influencing what I'm able and not able to do. But I also think that it promotes this myth, or that everybody has a disability. And I guess I would have said that I don't believe that to be true, because I understand disability to be a culture, and not everybody is of every culture. So it can promote that because of the fluidity of this model that says even folks that experience disability for a while, maybe because you broke your leg, so in that season you are experiencing the limits of disability. But whenever you don't have a broken leg anymore, you won't be disabled. Okay, the next one.
This one, you and I talked in preparation for this, and this one's my favorite. It resonates most with me, with my dyslexia and experiencing both, like the real limitations of that, but then also the societal expectations. So it addresses kind of, both the medical model and social model without having to choose. But
so I like that because you don't have to choose. And before I was familiar with that model, I was more of the social model out of the
right.
two. And yet, yes, it was very helpful for me to be able to name, I do have cerebral palsy. This does limit me, but it also it also doesn't have to just be all of who I am, and that the limits can be fluid depending on the day, depending on the situation. So I
Right.
lean toward the limits model now, and understand that the social model came out of our history. And I think that that is part of the reason why it's important to understand our
It
history.
kind of pushed so far to that social model to make a point.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
then the limits model is a way to say we can come find the middle space. That's both true. So some spiritual or existential questions I think of this model is how is God calling me into an interdependent relationship with others? This model, the limits model, says I, as a person with a disability, can engage in relationship with folks without disabilities, and vice versa. It focuses on relationship and not just on a diagnosis someone might have or the social and structural kind of barriers, but it says we are in relationship together. How do we do this? And then what gifts do I have to offer? So both the person with and without disabilities, saying, what gifts do I have to offer to my friends, to my community, to my faith community? And then what are my limits? And how do I honor my limits and the limits of others, whether you have a disability or not? We all have limits. Some of my limits are connected to the ways I am impacted by my disability, and some are not. It's just part of my personality, my culture. Like my limits are other than whatever my disability is. Okay.
So I have a question that came up. They are asking, did you use Same Lake, Different Boat as one of your source material? That is a well-known book that addressed 3 worldviews of disability in the context of culture and the church.
I did not, but now I wanna get that book. Thanks. Are there any other questions? I'll stop here. But I would say, like, they're, to me, it's kind of intertwined,
Right.
that there aren't different boats even, like it's all connected together and helpful.
Yeah, sometimes that medical model really helps to help with early intervention and resources and tools, and to get connected to that. And sometimes that social model can be really beneficial to help say, look at the systems that are really like adding to the disability and the experience of disability that we need to look at.
And I think that we all enter, those with disabilities, enter into this community through the medical model, right?
Right.
We are diagnosed either at birth or sometime early in life, or because of something that happened, right? But we are first introduced into this community, or inducted, or whatever the word is, through the medical model. And it is in relationship with, hopefully, both like some of social structures, other people with disabilities that we know or will get to know, that we are then kind of more familiarized with the social model of disability, because I think it promotes pride in who we are, pride in ourselves, and pride in this community that has existed before us, wherever we jump into this lake, essentially. Yeah. Part of what my doctoral project was to say, if I believe disability is a culture and has many things of value to offer to other cultures, and especially in our faith communities, this one particular is coming from a Christian tradition, since I am an ordained pastor. So I took the liturgical calendar and said disability theology, which is part of a culture, right? Ways in which we understand ourselves and the divine is shaped by our culture too. So I took the liturgical calendar, which my faith tradition is familiar with, and said, this is how disability theology can be used here, not just for folks with disabilities, but for the whole community. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. So if we look at Advent, right, it's a time of preparation for and anticipation for new ways we might encounter God personally or as a congregation. Also, new ways in which we understand something about the character of God as the disabled God, one of the images for God that is helpful for me as a person with a disability. Lastly, it is a season to remind ourselves that the people of God pattern ourselves differently than the wider society. We are to be inclusive people that enables God to be accessible to all. So we pattern ourselves in different ways. I think folks with disabilities are used to this, right? We live our lives differently. It doesn't make us different people, but because of the society we live in, we have to accommodate. And I think this helps us in our religious communities to say we are all committed to living differently than our society is trying to train us to be, because we are in this faith community. And I think it could be true of anyone in other faith communities. So, and if you're Muslim or whatever religious background you have, we are being formed and shaped in a way that's different than the larger culture. The same is true of the Christmas season, God in Jesus becoming flesh, God inhabiting the human experience, including the experience of disability, so that we would consider during this season how this good news of great joy can be true for all folks, including those with disabilities. Next one. Epiphany. So we would consider where and in whom we might notice the divine. Where in folks with disabilities is the divine being noticed, and how are people with disabilities noticing the divine in others and in things around us? And babies who are nonverbal, and fathers or mothers or guardians who care for those with disabilities, in those with wisdom, especially those with disabilities themselves in your church or a larger community. What gifts might people with disabilities have to share with your community that are missing? How might people with and without disabilities encounter the divine together? And Lent, which is the season we're currently in, it's a time for us to reflect on both the beauty and fragility of our bodies, abled or disabled, and our mortality. This is, I think, the season that levels folks with and without disabilities, because we're remembering that we will die. We all have limits. It doesn't matter if you have a disability or not. This is what it is, or part of what it is to be human. And then the Easter season is a time of resurrecting our faith and better acquainting ourselves with the disabled God, and what resurrection means. Okay, okay. To the next one. Then we have Pentecost, a time of celebration of the birth of the church, universal, also a time to acknowledge and celebrate that the Spirit of God indwells the lives of people, including those with disabilities, empowers us all to share the gospel with whoever we encounter, communicating in many languages and forms. And then ordinary time, a time to reflect and consider the ordinary ways in which God is in each of our lives and in the life of the church. It is also a time to cultivate a spirit of interdependence, the body of Christ supporting one another, both those with and without disabilities. Any reflection or question on the liturgical calendar? And again, these are just some ways that we can think about it. And
Letiah, we have a question. Somebody is asking, can you say more about the disabled God?
Yes. So the disabled God is a term coined by Nancy Eastland, who is the mother of disability theology. And Sarah's holding up the book. So it's the foundational work, I would say, within the disability community. And then folks build on it from there. So it's the sense that God understands what it is to be human, including the experience of disability, using as its main text Jesus's encounter with Thomas, where Thomas is invited to touch the wounds or the disabled God, which is both like societally taboo, and yet Jesus says you're invited to touch. And when that happens, Thomas then is able to articulate a measure of faith in God. So,
And there's also a big connection of like Jesus's scars don't go away after he
yes.
has a resurrected body. The scars don't disappear. And so the body still is disabled in a sense, versus cured or gone away, that the scars are still there.
And I
And so and you know, there's things that today people kind of push back on Eastland, but Eastland's point was really to make an initial point about Jesus's experience, kind of having a disability, and how that can connect with us as humans with disabilities.
And I think that is to say that there are those within the disability community who would affirm that, like, whatever heaven or the afterlife is, that would mean that I still in that body will have my disability, right? That there might not be pain associated with it, but my disability would be, because it is part of who I am, it is part of my culture, that it would also be present, while there are also some who would not affirm that. So yeah, it leaves room for different ways to interact with God and understanding our disabilities.
And it's really a book that was like the kind of the foundation of disability theology. Again, theologians will push back, disability theologians will push back today on what she says, but she even says at the beginning, like, I'm not saying y'all are going to agree with me. This is just to get the initial like thought and image going to start this conversation.
So for that, I think she did her work. So
she did.
Yeah. So I thought I would end with some prayers, and then we have some time for questions or more conversation, which I wanted time for. But part of my passions is to create prayers or liturgy that is affirmative of disability for both people with and without disabilities, because oftentimes in our spiritual spaces, but outside of that, our language equates disability to negative things. So like to sin, or to like the not right way to be, and the right way to be is disabled. Well, I think so. And the right way to be is non-disabled. So I have been working with a few folks on what that would look like. And so I offer these two prayers as an example. So yeah. There's one just because I use crutches. So a prayer of gratitude for those who use crutches, but this can be for any other assistive device. So God, the source of all gratitude, I give thanks for the human that invented crutches. My heart is full of joy for these inanimate objects made of aluminum that give me the ability to stand still and walk steadily. I give thanks because my crutches enables me to have greater independence and are tools that allow me to fulfill God's will on my life and be in service to the community. When I am tempted to harbor feelings of hatred toward them because they create false perceptions in the minds of others that often affect my relationships, employment, and social opportunities. Remind me that my crutches are part of who I am, but not all of who I am, and that they are daily gifts of grace to me. We pray this in the name of the one who is creator, sustainer, and guide. Amen. And here you'll see that the social model is used there. So that the crutches and my disability are parts of who I am, but not all of who I am. And then, so again, intertwining both the medical model and the social model of disability. Okay, we move to the next one. And then this one, internalized ableism, because folks with disabilities are having to kind of parse out the ableism that lives inside of us simply because we are swimming in a very ableist world. So incarnate God, who inhabited a human body and who was not accepted by religious institutions and by the larger society, grant us all the courage to live in a way that prophetically challenges the inaccessibility of our streets and sidewalks and buildings, our educational systems, legal systems, housing, and healthcare. Have mercy on those who continue to make the church inaccessible and paint God as disability phobic. Let us not be conformed to this distorted healing narratives linking our humanity to productivity or the myth of the exceptional disabled person. God, root out anything that seeks to separate us from our disabled bodies where God is pleased to dwell. In the name of God, who became disabled. Amen. So those are just some few examples. And then I want to open it up for some questions. We have some time or pushback or feedback. I'm good with that too.
So I'm gonna stop sharing so that we can see each other's
These people,
faces,
yeah.
and then I'll share it back again. I know we have two
Yeah, if you can help me
questions.
with the question, reading the questions, that would be good.
Yeah, no problem. So we have two questions that are questions slash comments, reflections.
Yeah.
Both are from Paul. First, Paul says, people who have disabilities have a higher dependence on God. At least this is my observation. Their view of God is a victorious God and a God of hope.
Yeah, I would say sometimes that's true, sometimes not. That I could go the way of having a higher dependence on God because I know that there are things that I physically can't do. So I understand the limits of what it is to be human and a human with a disability. I would also say that there have been times in my life where I've gone the other way, where it's been like, I've got to prove that I can do this because society has said I can't. So I'm going to show them that not only can I do it, but I can do it better. And I can do something else too. So like this exceptional disabled person, or this like trying to compensate for what I perceive society is seeing as a lack. So yes and no. Yeah.
And I would also add that maybe I mean, I'm thinking of times that people in general depend a lot on God. And those are times when they feel like they're marginalized,
Yes.
Feeling lonely, those kind of crappy parts of life. And having a disability at times when you feel especially the marginalization, then yes, you're more apt to go to, I mean, that's mostly when we go to God, right? For most people, disabled or not. When things are great, and you're flying high on life, people just tend to not go to God as much. Sadly.
I think maybe society has made it that maybe that's why folks with disabilities seem to be that way, or maybe
Right.
that way because we go to God more. Maybe. I guess my hesitation is I want to get away from that stereotype too, that like because I have a disability or because people with disabilities have disabilities, that we have like this special connection to God that's
Correct.
different than anybody else. So
I
that's
would
my
agree.
perspective. Yeah.
That's why I said it. I don't know if it's so much about the disability that makes me rely on God more or depend on God more, as much as it can be the marginalization that makes me
Yes.
maybe go to God more. Is that experience?
Yes.
I also have oh, so he's also reflecting on the disabled God and that book and kind of what you've shared so far. He says God identifies with us, he becomes vulnerable and yet our strength. However, I need to read the book God is disabled God, to make more sense of this concept.
Yeah, so I think toward the beginning of the book, it's been a minute since I've read it, but I think toward the beginning of the book, she gives us an image of her view of God, Nancy Eastland, and it is someone who uses a sip puff wheelchair. So someone that uses, it's like a straw-like device where folks blow into the straw to be able to move the wheelchair around.
Right.
And as a God who is a quadriplegic. So that's her view of God. So if we understand or have that image of God, then as the disabled God, instead of a God that is all powerful, all knowing, all things. Yeah.
And what does it mean to be both all of those things, but then
And
also human?
which is
And
the thing with Jesus, right? That
right.
that Jesus is all human and all God. So the disabled God can fit into that like
Which is
framework.
really hard to conceptualize. Really hard to conceptualize. We have Reverend Wanda. Hey, Reverend Wanda. She says, my apologies for coming in late, so I have missed some discussion, but please share your thoughts on administering sacraments, particularly communion for people with disabilities, particularly those with severe intellectual disabilities.
So I will say that I am coming from more of a Wesleyan understanding of my spirituality. And so I understand the sacraments to be a means of grace to all people, whether they articulate faith in God or not. But the very act of receiving the sacraments can be a faith producing act.
Right.
So I'd say the table is open as long as you can articulate however you articulate that. And I think that even just wanting the sacraments is an articulation of a desire or search for God or wanting to be close to God and to be in the community of folks that are participating in the sacrament.
And what does it mean to be in relationship with God? To experience love with one another, to experience belonging. I mean, that's what communion and baptism is really kind of lifting up, is that connectedness. Is it important that somebody intellectualizes that in a certain way, which I don't know if any of us can fully intellectualize that, or is it about connecting and belonging?
That there are like our Eastern Orthodox folks and some more high church folks articulate this better. Like we cannot fully understand God, that God is a mystery. And so I think that folks who might not be able to intellectually assent to something, which there are things I can't do, you live into the mystery of who God is and the desire to participate in community in these sacraments.
And I've been present when somebody knows when they're not being included. They know when they don't belong. They know when they're not a part of the community. They do know that. And so absolutely. Yes, Reverend Wanda, this webinar will be available to review. So this is being recorded. It's on our Stone Belts Facebook currently, and will be recorded on there, but then it'll also go up on our website as well. And I will email everybody when that gets up on the website so you can share and ask questions and review. And I'll even share with you all the PowerPoint. I'll put it into make it into a PDF, and so you'll get that all in an email, a follow-up email.
And I mean, this is
Evelyn, I'm sorry.
a long conversation, so this is like just getting started on this conversation. Yeah. But you said you had a
Evelyn
question.
McMullen says, hi Evelyn, what is a helpful response to the quote, "You are such an inspiration," end quote?
Yeah, so I sometimes show the TED Talk from Stella Young, who is another disability rights person who coined the term inspiration porn. And so I would say, and this is how I articulate that, if I am doing something that you would congratulate me whether I had a disability or not, then I can be an inspiration to you. So if I went and climbed, let's say Mount Everest, like I think that's a feat that a person with or without a disability, that's inspiring. So I think look at the motive and like why you're saying that, and would you say that to if I had a disability and if I didn't have a disability. So I guess my response to "you're such an inspiration," I often throw the question back, can you tell me why I'm inspiring you today? Can you articulate that for me in some way? And then if it's, oh, because I woke up this morning and tied my shoe, then I offer that critique. Can I give you feedback and say, this is how that sounds to me? And however, if there are things that actually inspire you, then yes.
Which is really hard, because even when I hear that now, like I like cringe, even when it is like they legitimately mean like something else that I've achieved, not because of my disability. It's it's
But
a
I'm the type of
hard
person
phrase.
that does those awkward questions. So, and I can sit in the awkward. I know that some people can't, but that's one option.
I love it, Letiah. We've got another question. Did you discuss belongingness along with inclusiveness? So one person with a disability shared that she has been to churches where she was included, but she did not feel like she belonged. Great question, Wanda.
Yeah, I did not. But because my task was more the models, but part of the longer or a different presentation would have included the difference between like belonging and like just being present there. Yeah.
So, I mean, we've got a little bit of time, not to put you on the spot, Letiah. But what would your like quick response be of the difference between what it means to be included versus belong?
Yeah, so included is like we have, there's ramps and there's things here for you, or there's like a special class for you that's included, or you could sit in the sanctuary. Belonging is you've really thought about the presence of all people, right? In all levels of leadership and volunteerism. Like if I wanted to, I could sing in the choir, and I can have a vision if I'm called to that, be the preacher, right? And does the architectural surroundings support that? Does the ways in which I'm discipled support that? Is it differentiated within the same community as everybody else, right? There's not like a separate, like, here's the class for you, or here's the discipleship program for you, and here's the one for everybody else, but that we are thinking strategically about how that is. And that on the committees or boards or however you're structure works, that there are people that have disabilities, both visible and invisible, so that it's that culture, that voice, that understanding is at the table too.
Yeah, and I've also heard kind of the visual explanation of, so a person, inclusion means you have a place at the table, so you're able to, you're present, you're able to be there, but you don't really have a role there. You're there, but you're just attending. Whereas belonging means you have a role, you're being heard. You're not only do you have a voice, but your voice and opinions and gifts are being utilized and heard. So then there's some leadership and ownership into the participation.
And that you're able to give feedback because sometimes we just don't know. Like there's ignorance and there's not always malice, right? So
Right.
you're able to give feedback and say, this is not accessible. Or when you sang this song, this is what it communicates about people with disabilities, or when you use this object lesson, whatever it is. So they're able to push back on some of the systems.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Any last questions before we wrap up?
I will. So let me go up here again. You can all donate. I'm going to put that. So that I just sent is our spiritual support page. So that is where you all will be able to find the recorded webinar. It might take me a couple weeks, but I will send an email out letting you all know that it's there. And then you can donate on this site. Again, I put those in the chat box. My email is right there in the chat box, so check that out. And Letiah, what is yours?
Is my name, so Letiah and then Fraser Fraser @gmail.com. It's also in the PowerPoint toward the end. We just didn't get to that slide, but it's good.
And so yes, so you all will be able to see the recorded webinar. You'll get the PDF file of all of the slides. And yeah. Did you have something else,
Hey, I can't
Letiah?
hear you for some reason. I think the sound. Go to the next slide. Keep going.
There we go.
I can't hear you, but that's okay. It's
Oh no.
hear you now. Okay.
Okay, good. So yes, so please feel free. Thank you all for coming. Shoot Reverend Dr. Letiah your questions.
It might just be me though, so I'm assuming everybody else can hear you.
Oh no. All right. Who knows? Hopefully you all can hear me. I don't know. Well, thank you all for coming and have a blessed day.